Dracarys.
Nothing is more valuable than experience, as demonstrated by Daenerys, who has learned from past mistakes. Without any losses, she successfully recruited 8,000 unsullied soldiers under her command. With her commanding presence and unique democratic leadership style, Daenerys won the hearts and loyalty of everyone, including her trusted guards Yora and Barristan. To facilitate the management of the unsullied army, Daenerys gathered all the squad leaders. After discussions, selected the most capable commander, Grayscale, as the overall commander. From then on, Grayscale became Daenerys' right-hand man. While continuing their search for ships, the army arrived at the Slavers' Bay. Yora mentioned a city known for training special slaves who do not engage in direct combat, that they have strong walls, sufficient food, and time if a battle were to break out in the wilderness. Moreover, capturing this city would not significantly aid in taking over the Seven Kingdoms. However, upon learning that there were 200,000 slaves within the city, Daenerys decided to grant them their freedom.
Then we have 200,000 reasons to take the city.
She sent Grayscale to the city gates to inform them that she awaited their surrender. If they refused, Slavers' Bay would suffer the same fate as Astapor. When the slave masters, who had come to negotiate, saw the unsullied soldiers they had only heard of but never seen before, their confidence instantly waned. When the slave master, who considered himself well-traveled, saw the 3 dragons in the hall, he was completely dumbfounded. But as Daenerys graciously entertained him, the bewildered slave master regained his arrogance. Slavers' Bay, they mentioned, has a long and glorious history, and even before the dragons disrupted the world, countless armies had been defeated beneath their towering walls. They advised Daenerys to abandon any thoughts of conquering them, but Daenerys knew that the people of Essos had never seen dragons before. Uninterested in their hollow words, she picked up a piece of meat and silenced the slave master. She argued that the Unsullied also needed real combat experience, so it was a perfect opportunity for them to shed blood. The slave master countered that bloodshed wasn't necessary. He claimed to have brought gold and ships under the command of Slavers' Bay's rulers. He also emphasized their generosity and forgiveness, stating that they would not hold Daenerys accountable for her actions in Astapor. As long as she took the gold and ships and left Slavers' Bay, it would be enough. Observing the slaves standing beside the slave master, Daenerys declared that she had a gift to offer as well. That gift was their lives and the lives of all the rulers of Slavers' Bay. The condition for accepting this gift was to release all the slaves and provide them with sufficient food and wealth as compensation. Upon hearing this, the slave master became agitated, claiming that Slavers' Bay was not like the 2 cities she had destroyed. They had money, allies, and once she and her forces were defeated, everyone, including her, would become their slaves.
Swore me safe conduct.
Bet my dragons made no promises, and you threatened their mother.
Take the gold.
My gold. You gave it to me, remember?
After the slave master departed, Daenerys instructed Yora to investigate the allies mentioned by the slave master. The current Daenerys no longer displayed the anxiety and panic she had previously shown. She understood that those who fought for money had no honor or loyal subjects. After gathering information, Daenerys learned that the allies mentioned by the slave master were the formidable sellsword company called the Second Sons, who fought solely for money. The leader's name is Marrow, and the entire company consists of 2,000 fully armed cavalry soldiers. They are known for rarely experiencing defeat. Barristan also acknowledged their formidable combat capabilities.
Sure the sellswords prefer to fight for the winning side? I'd like to talk to the Titan's bastard about winning. Man who fights for gold can't afford to lose to a girl.
Upon hearing that the leader was a woman, the 3 male captains, Marrow as the main captain, Astapo as the vice captain, and Dario Naharis as the squad leader, arrived as promised. Marrow, having never tasted defeat, didn't even consider Daenerys a threat. However, the current Daenerys was different from before and wore a smile on her face. She jokingly remarked that with only 2,000 men, how could they defeat her 8,000 unsullied soldiers? Marrow claimed that they had won battles with even more significant disparities in strength. Daenerys then tested the waters by suggesting that since they were mercenaries, they could be hired by her. Astapo replied that they had already accepted payment from the slave masters and couldn't go back on their contract. Otherwise, no one would dare to sign a contract with the Second Sons again. Daenerys countered by saying that if they followed her, they wouldn't need to seek employers anymore. She promised that once she conquered the 7 kingdoms, they would receive ample gold and castles. She gave them 2 days to consider her offer and, before leaving, even gifted them a barrel of fine wine. However, Meryl remarked that after the battle, they would share Daenerys, indicating their unwillingness to compromise. He also taunted Missandei before departing, facing a force of 2,000 against her 8,000. With such a significant disparity in power, Meryl, the captain of the Second Sons, proposed a plan. It involved capturing the thief first before capturing the king. Since it was a new moon night, he suggested that 3 people be chosen, and after sunset, they would infiltrate and assassinate Daenerys. As the coin toss game concluded, Dario, the squad leader, was selected for the task. Disguised as a dirty soldier, Dario successfully entered Daenerys' tent, startling her while she was bathing. Daenerys asked why Dario, sent by the captain to kill her, didn't simply attack her directly. Dario immediately presented the heads of the 2 men he had killed. In truth, he was captivated by Daenerys' unique aura and was willing to follow her. However, Daenerys questioned why she should trust someone who could kill his own comrades.
They ordered me to murder you. I told them I am Dario Naharis. I always...
Will you fight for me?
My heart is yours.
The next day, Dario proposed a plan. The members of the Second Sons would enter through the back gate, where the people of Slavers Bay knew him. He would eliminate the gatekeeper and enter with the 2 strongest fighters through the side gate, navigating familiar back alleys to open the main gate. This would allow the unsullied army to enter the city. Facing Dario, who had only joined them less than a day ago, Yora expressed doubts about the plan, suggesting that it could be a trap. He pointed out that once they were inside, Dario could easily capture them and collect a reward from the Slavers Bay leaders without having to split it with his 2 silenced partners. As Grayscale was the leader of the 8,000 soldiers, they also wanted to hear his opinion. That night, the 3 of them arrived at the side gate, and Dario successfully dealt with the gatekeeper as planned. However, when Grayscale and Yora entered, they found a small squad waiting in the alleyway. Fortunately, the few of them were seasoned warriors, but just as they dealt with the soldiers in front of them, an unexpected wave of soldiers surged out from the alley. Time passed, and a restless Daenerys even questioned Barristan about the situation. Eventually, a weary Yora and Grayscale entered from outside, admitting that the enslaved soldiers, who were unwilling to fight for their masters, had thrown down their spears and surrendered. When Daenerys inquired about Dario, Yora's emotions were conflicted.
The city is yours, my queen.
Many people become accustomed to wearing chains for so long that they may even come to love the sensation. Now, with the liberation of 200,000 slave soldiers, Daenerys found herself less certain. However, the common people, who had lived as generations of slaves, had never heard such heartfelt words from such a powerful leader. Misa means mother in the language of the slaves. As everyone echoed the word, Daenerys removed the defenses of her 3 dragons. She walked slowly into the crowd, feeling the accomplishments brought by the freedom of 200,000 individuals. After weeks of marching, the 3 dragons entered their adolescence and were able to venture out for their own hunting. However, their innate wildness came along with it. As the army had now grown in size, a large fleet of ships was necessary to cross the sea and reclaim the Iron Throne. The only city on the continent that could meet this requirement was the ancient and prosperous city of Meereen. On the way to Meereen, a distance of 163 miles from the entrance to the castle, there were markers every mile with the corpses of slaves hanging from them. Barristan suggested sending people ahead to bury these children to spare Daenerys from the distress.
I will see each and every one of their faces.
Because Meereen was the main port city for slave production, it was also home to the wealthiest nobles on the continent. When Daenerys arrived outside the city gates with her army and asked Yora whether they should attack, only 1 cavalryman emerged from the massive gates. Yora explained that he was Meereen's champion and that they were hoping for someone to come forward to duel. Almost like a noble's game, the champion of Meereen was not modest at all and directly showcased his arrogance. He taunted Daenerys, calling her a false man, Although the challenge was issued by only one person, it represented the strength of both sides and laid the foundation for the upcoming. Everyone was eagerly anticipating this duel because the victorious side would undoubtedly gain an advantage in their subsequent arguments. Faced with the knight on horseback armed with a spear, Daenerys once again confirmed if Dario truly did not ride horses. Dario replied that horses were stupider than humans. The entire audience, nobles and slaves alike, were dumbfounded. The champion knight of their own castle hadn't even made a move, and the duel was already over. Dario scored another point. Daenerys stepped forward to introduce herself and mentioned the two cities she had previously visited. She stood before all the slaves, now in Meereen. Seeing the scattered collars, not only did the slaves experience a change in their hearts, but also the concerns of the slave masters. No one is born willing to be a slave, just like Grayscale and Missandei, who were born into unprivileged families, only to be snatched by slave masters and forced into generations of bondage. As Daenerys entered, she interrupted the two and reminded Grayscale that the time for the plan had come. It turned out that she had sent a group of unsullied through the sewers during the night to infiltrate the slave quarters, where the slaves were currently discussing the events of the day. Just as everyone was contemplating whether or not to resist, Grayscale entered, boosting the morale of the crowd. He spoke of his own background as a former slave and how the appearance of the queen had overthrown the ruling slave masters, allowing him to become a free man once again. Now, he fought only for his faith. After his speech, all the Unsullied revealed the weapons they had concealed on their backs. The next day, as the slave masters walked through the streets, they discovered slogans written on every corner. Furthermore, the harpy statue atop the central pyramid of the city had been covered with the banners of House Targaryen. Where there is oppression, there will be resistance. By incorporating ideological support and providing weapons at the right time, one can ignite the spark in the hearts of these slaves. Having just incorporated a formidable army of 200,000, Daenerys precisely orchestrated a slave uprising to capture Meereen. As she looked upon the gathered liberated slaves at the execution platform, Daenerys ordered the execution of 163 slave masters, reminiscent of the way children were crucified on the road to Meereen. However, the seasoned Barristan spoke up, stating that the entire city belonged to her now, and all the people were her subjects. He suggested that responding with mercy instead of these extreme methods might yield better results. Daenerys immediately countered, arguing that an eye for an eye, blood for blood was the correct approach to dealing with these slave masters. Unbeknownst to her, this approach, while momentarily satisfying, planted the seeds of future troubles. In an attempt to please Daenerys, Dario took it upon himself to seize Meereen's fleet. Daenerys did not reprimand him for his actions. However, there were only a total of 93 ships, which, when accounted for, could carry 9,300 people across the narrow sea. Yora expressed doubts about the capability of these people to confront the ruler of the Seven Kingdoms in King's Landing. Furthermore, the cities of Astapor and Slavers Bay, previously conquered, had fallen back into the control of slave masters after Daenerys' departure. The people they left behind were killed, and the survivors were enslaved once again, with threats of revenge. The loss of these two cities made Daenerys realize her shortcomings in governance. Even if she were to conquer the Seven Kingdoms, her lack of effective management would undo her achievements. Therefore, she decided to stay in Meereen, to learn and rule over this continent. However, as her dragons grew, there began to be issues with their food sources. Witnessing the people's livestock being consumed by her dragons, ruling Daenerys offered triple compensation to the owners. The second audience she received was Daznak, a descendant of Meereen's nobility. Daznak claimed that his father was a respected pyramid builder in Meereen.
For that, he has my gratitude. I should be honored to meet him.
You crucified him.
Your father crucified innocent children.
And they did not desire these crimes. His father had opposed such actions in the past, but his objections were dismissed. Given the circumstances, he only hoped to follow Meereen's traditions and give his father a dignified burial in the temple. Faced with the repeated pleas of a son, the compassionate Daenerys ultimately agreed to the burial of the body. That night, after persistently pursuing her, Dario, who had been longing for intimacy, finally achieved his desire. The following day, Jorah overheard Daenerys' plan to send Dario to Slaver's Bay, to kill all the rebellious slave masters and reclaim the castles. He told Daenerys that such actions were no different from cruel governance, as the slaves would only understand violence and perpetrate it even if they obtained the castles. To address the root cause, they must learn to offer choices between good and evil. Finally, the politically inexperienced Daenerys compromised and allowed Daznak and Dario to go together, presenting them with the choice of either accepting her rule or being killed.